Welcome back. You're watching Full View here on SABC News Channel. We are unpacking the ANC's People's Manifesto, as they've called it, and we are in studio with Chartered Accountant Analyst Khaya Sithole, and from our Durban studios, media and political analyst Sbu Ngalwa. A very good evening to all of you, and welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
Khaya, let me just start with you listening into Stephen's conversation with the national chairperson, and I was quite intrigued that he said that if the ANC is to be honest, gear was the very policy that created the most growth in the country in post-democratic South Africa. And we know that's been quite controversial. Yeah. But I'm wondering, given what COSATU was saying, given what the SACP was saying, I mean, they're looking for a mass, broad-based empowerment labor force. How are they going to roll that out if growth and capitalism is at the forefront?
Yeah, so it was quite interesting to then hear that reference to gear, because one of the things that came through in the manifesto was that the ANC said, look, we've tripled the size of the economy since 1994, and back then I think the number that they use is that they've grown it by at least 7 million jobs, or rather they said that there were 7 million jobs in place at that stage. Now, of course, remember way back in 1994, the difference would be that the base was very small. The economy had essentially been constructed to really cater to a very limited audience. Now, of course, to then try and expand that, it was always going to sort of expand as it were as an economy, because everybody was then allowed to participate. Now, the key question here is, how then do you then identify which parts of gear really drove that versus the parts of the fact that the economy essentially became far more liberal than it was before? And I suspect that when we then look back at gear, you then look at the numbers and then say it was during that particular period where perhaps the economy had very robust growth indicators. And of course, that was the time that coincided with gear being the official policy. And then over time, as the ANC shifted from one policy to the next, you then saw perhaps even the financial crisis then coinciding with them articulating another policy shift. So then when there's a decline in the workforce, when there's a decline in the economy, you then try and extract, well, is this simply because of exogenous factors that we had no influence in, or is it simply because we as a political party have been very, very wishy-washy about what we think is the ultimate economic policy for South Africa? But of course, one of the big criticisms that has always prevailed relating to gear is that, look, it really did boost the economy, and yet it left far too many people without the ability to climb onto that bandwagon. So of course, if we're then going to move forward and say we want to replicate that, the one difference would have to be that people have to be absorbed into that new economic consensus that you adopt at that point in time. And of course, COSATU is valid in saying that, look, we acknowledge that at some point in time we did have this glorious phase as a country where the economy did indeed grow, but we still feel that it left way too many people out of the loop. And unfortunately, when you've got a growing workforce, when you've got so many unemployed people out there, you then need to ensure that whatever it is that you sort of put forward as an agenda item for the next 5 years is going to tackle that. So whatever economic consensus we really sign up for as voters, if we're then going to adopt what the ANC is recommending in its manifesto, it has to be very clear that we've done something like this before, but this time you need to ensure that those people whose skill set doesn't give them the ability to migrate between jobs, whose ability to access the economy has always been compromised, these people need to be catered for in whatever it is that you sign up for in the future. So we'd want COSATU in particular to be at the epicenter of whatever the ANC then decides to adopt going forward. Otherwise, we're going to really be running around in circles. And of course, with an ever-growing population, you're then going to see that the unemployment numbers are going to get much worse if we don't find a way to be more inclusive.
And part of all of this conversation, of course, is about the civil service. President Cyril Ramaphosa had plenty to say today while speaking at the Moses Mabida Stadium about exactly that issue, the civil service in South Africa.
We are building a developmental state that puts people first and has dedicated public servants who work diligently to ensure that we improve the lives of our people. Many of our public servants are people who are committed and dedicated professionals who do perform their tasks with diligence and faithfully. However, as we go around our country and as our people interface and go with government and go to government facilities, they often find that a number of civil servants are indifferent to the needs and concerns of citizens. And this has led to the deterioration in the quality of services and assistance that is rendered. Now, we want this to change. This will change because we want civil servants who are committed to serving the people of South Africa and not themselves. We want civil servants who are going to put the interests of our people first and not themselves and their friends and their relatives. Civil servants must serve the people of our country with commitment and diligence, but also serve them with humility, with respect, with honesty, and make sure that they are effective agents of transformation. We want, as they work to implement government programs, they must handle things such as land claims that must be processed faster.
That's President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking this afternoon at the Moses Mabida Stadium in Durban. Joining us, of course, in our studio, Khaya Sithole, the analyst and chartered accountant, and in our Durban studio, Sbu Ngalwa, the media and political analyst. Sbu, if we can go to you now. I mean, we've had endless conversations within the ANC and the Alliance about the civil service. If we're going to talk about reforming the civil service for many people, you'll be talking immediately about just trying to get, for example, external inspectors in schools. Do you think the ANC will actually be able to do this, to reform the civil service in this way?
Good afternoon to you, colleagues. Well, the issue of the public service, obviously there has that perception that has been there for years, that there's a lot of lethargy within the public service, and that the public servants are not necessarily serving the communities that they're meant to serve. But what you have actually seen, I think it's important that the President actually mentioned that in his speech, because what you have seen over the past 5-10 years is the erosion of public institutions, and also I think civil servants actually their behavior and how they treat the communities that they serve actually feeds off the kind of leadership that is there. I mean, if you talk about issues of corruption, for instance, we've seen corruption from all levels of government, right from the top to the bottom level. So it is important actually to start rebuilding and ensuring that the civil service is up and running, and also to restore the integrity in public institutions as well. So insofar as that is concerned, I think it's a work in progress. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we can actually say that we have the best civil service, but I think there are certain indicators that point to a good civil service. For instance, it's functioning hospitals, it's schools that are starting on time, and also children that are being educated, and all other services that talk to that.
What's fascinating about it, if we go through the manifesto, and I made this point to the chair of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, a short while ago. You might have shaken hands with him as you were walking into that studio. But one of the things that comes out of it, of course, is the idea that you have the situation where he has to take on unions. In other words, it comes often, as it so often does, back to something like Eskom. You actually have to be able to say to unions, you have to do this, there will be consequence management. And yet we have Cosatu today expressing really full-throated support, I thought, for President Ramaphosa, the New Dawn and the ANC itself. Seem to be having problems with the Durban studio. Khaya Sithole, if I can put the question to you, I mean, it really is a very complicated thing to do. You've got to overcome Cosatu. Cosatu perhaps is in a weaker position than it's been for many, many years.
And I think, you know, one of the strange things, of course, is that the ANC, being part of an alliance, has always regarded Cosatu as an integral part of this alliance. And of course, Cosatu has to then defend the position of its of its members, primarily the civil servants. And I think the key issue here, when we talk about essentially the decline in the civil service, and I think as Sbu indicated earlier on, there has been this decline in the sense of accountability throughout the civil service. Now, of course, when that starts from the top, when there are no consequences for very egregious acts of maladministration that happen within the civil service, it is difficult to imagine that the people that are working at much lower levels will then suddenly subscribe to a much higher or a much more elevated accountability compact. And I suspect that what you want to do is that you want to drive this conversation from the top down to say, look, we are ushering in a new era of accountability. party, and this means that this is going to filter down to the civil service at large. And I think when you then have to go and sort of negotiate with a union, particularly like SADTU, is to then explain to them that, look, of course we are trying to run a government, and we've seen how we've done things over the past 24 to 25 years. These are the enduring fault lines. These are enduring weaknesses. This is where we'd like you guys to help us out. And obviously concessions have to be made across the board. So if we all form the opinion that perhaps to improve the public education system, to improve the standards there, we need to perhaps have a different way of appointing maybe principals or school inspectors, then that's a concession that a union like such would have to make in order for them to sort of then say we are part of an alliance that works. Because remember, it is in their collective interest that the state functions, because at the end of the day, if the state collapses and this becomes a type of thing that sees the ANC losing power and being kicked out of government, it doesn't matter that you're an alliance partner, because you're an alliance partner to somebody who's not in government. And I think it is about time, 25 years down the line, where people then have to start thinking the long term to say, well, actually, we're not guaranteed power going forward. So how do we ensure that the public can at least see that there's a difference between who we were and who we're trying to be? And of course, if the public doesn't see the change, it's a problem.
We'll see how they blend or blur those lines, and we'll look at it from the perspective of land in just a moment as well. But I'd like us to hear, Stephen, from our listeners. We've been asking them, are you convinced by the election manifesto, the People Manifesto launched by the governing party earlier on? Let's listen to some of the voice notes that some of you have sent.
Hi, I'm Oscar Sijila. I'm more than happy with the manifesto presented by our president. The president has shown to be very, very wise with planning and presenting the manifesto. Whatever was said there, it didn't give anyone any opportunity to throw the mud or to criticize. Thank you.
When it's election time, these people keep giving us a list of promises, and we are always giving them a chance. This time we want them to implement these promises and stop telling us about them, but do what they say they are going to do.
Okay, so those are just some of your WhatsApp voice notes, but we want to hear more from the election manifesto. President of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking about the various forms of land ownership that the party is looking to. Let's take a look back at his earlier statements.